All right, so I'm going to kick it back over to the city manager.
Okay.
Presentation
And,
portion.
and just for the sake of those, I don't know when we went off air, but I'll just do the introduction just very quickly. Again, good evening. Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council, staff, and hopefully our listening and viewing audience. For the manager's report, I am going to turn it over to our manager of Office and Sustainability very quickly to provide you with an update on our climate justice initiative. And without any further ado, especially since we've lost a little time with some technical difficulty, I'm going to turn it over to Amber Weaver, who is, again, the manager of our Office of Sustainability. Amber, take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Campbell, and hello to Madam Mayor and fellow council members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all on the Office's Climate Justice Initiative. Want to highlight here that the work of the Climate Justice Initiative has been broken up into 2 phases. The office is presently wrapping up phase 1 and in the beginning process of phase 2. Key takeaways worth mentioning here includes underscoring the work of the Climate Justice Initiative as being led by Asheville's Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC community members. The Office of Sustainability is utilizing the Government Alliance on Race and Equity toolkit. The present pandemic has amplified compounding environmental factors that contribute to existing inequities. And the creation of the Climate Justice Screening Tool will bring forth those voices of Asheville's BIPOC community members when implementing city plans and policies. Next slide, please. In January 2020, Asheville City Council declared a climate emergency. Resolution 2025 states that a climate justice plan be created to consolidate the various separate sustainability goals and department initiatives. The adopted resolution acknowledges the urgent need to combat climate change and the many existing relevant resolutions and goals and the disproportionate impact of the climate crisis on Asheville's frontline community members. In 2018, the Asheville Climate Resilience Assessment was included in the adoption of the comprehensive plan, Living Asheville. Through the work of the Climate Resilience Assessment, Asheville's climate threats and hazards were identified. Here you see the the climate threats in bold print. Next slide. The City of Asheville's Office of Sustainability worked with UNC Asheville's National Environmental Modeling and Analysis Center to determine how Asheville can become more resilient to environmental changes. Asheville's Climate Resilience Assessment helps the city be prepared for and hopefully lessen the impacts of future extreme weather events due to climate change. Resilience is about investing before the hazard. See the green rectangle. Investing the right amount in the right vulnerable areas will allow our community to reach a higher baseline, and therefore, in the event of disaster, we won't drop as far and we'll be able to bounce back more quickly, therefore building resilience. On this next slide, you can see that the office embarked on a path of this concept of climate justice, and in doing so, it was important to look at the work that was already addressing this important issue within the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. Through staff training, we know that our frontline communities, our BIPOC members, are those voices that are heard the least. We also know that sustainability voices lean toward white wealth, and it's imperative that in order to work on climate justice, that our office incorporate those voices of community members that contribute the least to climate change and yet are most greatly impacted. Through GARE trainings and one-on-one equity coaching, the office felt it necessary to interview others within the network that are embarking on similar work, understand the lessons learned and how Asheville might improve its process. What we learned is that we too are members of our community that come from a place of privilege, and in order to properly address and define climate equity, we need to hear from BIPOC community members of Asheville. I'd also like to point out that the Office of Sustainability received grant funding from USDN to help pay frontline community members for their participation. Next slide. In April 2020, the office entered into a contract with Marisol Jimenez of Tapiac Consulting, a minority woman-led local business, to develop and conduct listening and learning sessions with BIPOC leaders and community members. In collaboration with these voices, the office seeks to begin shaping a locally relevant definition of climate equity. The first phase of listening and learning sessions, the report has synthesized, findings from a series of one-on-one interviews with 12 BIPOC leaders living and working in and with frontline communities throughout the city of Asheville. When participants were asked to reflect on what community resilience has meant to them, they described communities that are self-sustaining with strong support networks, which are deeply rooted in relationships. Community members describe the 3 pillars that make community self-sustaining: economic power, healthy environments, and strong social networks. I'd also like to take the opportunity to acknowledge and thank Vice Mayor Shanika Smith for her role in the listening and learning session. The next phase of the work included story circles. Next slide. Here, I'd just like to take a moment to kind of show you the methodology used. Here we included Asheville's climate threats and hazards and overlaid them with equity data that includes the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, redlining, the racial dot, demographic, and RMI energy burden. The next slide here shows you the Asheville racial dot map. It's very fascinating. When you also go to the next slide and look at the CDC overall social vulnerability index, you see that those same high levels of vulnerability are highlighted as communities of color in the racial dot map. In case you can't see, I'd like to just go over that the CDC Social Vulnerability Index on the right includes socioeconomic status, household composition and disability, minority status and language, housing and transportation. Next slide, please. Through the process of creating a climate justice data map, the city was able to create an index to help visualize and understand local climate threats alongside compounding social and economic stressors. This map is one tool helping staff define, discuss, and address climate resilience through equity. A working definition of climate equity is having access to information, relationships, land, and resources needed to have sovereignty and self-direction in response to climate crisis events and long-term sustainability that is community-led, deeply informed, organized, and prepared for a rapid response, well-resourced response. Due to time, I'm unable to work our tool here, but just so you know, if you can go back one more slide, please. Just so you and the audience members know, the climate justice data map. So the next slide, Ashley. There is a link and you can click on the link and put in your own personal address and see the climate threats and the climate justice index for your neighborhood. We use this information, and then we can go to the next slide, please. We use this information to go directly into the neighborhoods that are most vulnerable using the data that we went over. This is an example of a map that was developed by Karen Hanna, a graphic artist, and are being shared with neighborhood residents through these story circles. Story circles involve creating a neighborhood-based maps outlining the specific climate threats in each of our 4 neighborhoods through the climate justice map. Those neighborhoods included Shiloh, Emma, Pisgah View, and Deaver View. Because of the large concentration of Latinx residents living outside the city limits in neighboring Emma community, it felt critical that their voices be included in this conversation. It should also be noted that these same communities have also been amongst the hardest hit by the public health and economic impacts of the COVID pandemic, as well as a year of trauma and social uprising against structural racism. Next slide. The last project within the first phase is the Youth Artist Empowerment. The Youth Artist Empowerment will engage with youth around climate change in local communities through digital media and public art installation. This cohort of BIPOC youth artists will also be connected to a national network of climate activists, scientists, and working artists to deepen the intersection of climate activism, cultural, artistic organizing. Youth will utilize current digital tools merged with in-person story sharing to create a meaningful public art display centered around climate justice and equity, centering vulnerable communities by sharing their stories and images through the faces of change. Final images will be collaged into a unified fine art piece presented in the public. Next slide, please. Next steps include utilizing feedback from frontline community members to help create a screening tool that we can use when implementing city plans and policies, essentially pulling themes heard from these community members and youth and applying them as an equity voice when implementing plans and policies. Examples might include reparations, comprehensive plan, or how the Office of Sustainability continues to implement council sustainability goals and initiatives. Here you see on this slide, another piece of art from graphic artist Carolyn Hanna, who has been working with the Asheville Buncombe Food Policy Council and Bountiful Cities to help create and identify resources for food emergencies. Other options on how we might utilize this information is listed as well. And again, climate justice into city reparations process. Also the ability to utilize this work around food emergency and neighborhood planning as well. Let's see. So I think, let's go on to the next slide. And again, I just want to go over the key takeaways again, really highlight the different phases here. We're closing out phase one, and we're pulling themes from the three pieces of the projects: the listening and learning session, the story circles, and the youth art, to pull themes, to have a screening tool. So when we're able to implement policies and plans, that will have heard from our most vulnerable community members and thinking of their suggestions thoughtfully and how we might conduct implementation practices. We'll be working on this second phase, and the goal is to come back to council in January 2022 to present the climate justice screening tool and the final report. And that concludes the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Councilwoman Rooney has a question.
Great.
Thank you, Amber, for this presentation. Thank you to Marisol and Karen and all the community members who've participated so far in the Climate Justice Initiative. The question I have for tonight regarding this presentation is, I noted that this will lead to a sort of a filter of how we review our plans and policies, but I was curious how it might also impact our budget, and if it was by design to leave the budget out at this point, or if it will include budget analysis as well.
That is a great question. If you recall, the climate emergency also asks for the office to condense and streamline a lot of the resolutions that have been adopted since the 2009 Sustainability Management Plan. And through that work, which is titled the Municipal Climate Action Plan, we will also be able to overlay this lens, this screening tool, and that work of the Municipal Climate Action Plan will indeed be a part of the city's budget process.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Great question. Thank you for asking.
Any other questions?
Well, I'd like to thank you then again for an opportunity to update you all. We're just an email or a phone call away. If you think of any questions later on down the road after you've had time to process what we discussed, please reach out. We're happy to answer any questions.
And
Thank you,
Mayor, if I could, if we could just keep council informed of community meetings and so forth. I know that you give a shout out to the vice mayor. If we could let other council members know of the events as we hopefully make progress on delivering something in January, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for me, Mayor.
That's okay. Thank you. All right. We're now on to the public hearings portion of our agenda tonight. We originally had scheduled 4 items for public hearing. And before I begin, on the first item, I need to be recused. So can I get a motion and a second to recuse me from the first item on our public hearings agenda regarding Urban Form Place District?
So moved. This is Sage, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And we'll do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Turner,
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Smith,
Aye.
Councilwoman Kilgore,
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley,
Aye.
and Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
All right, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to the Vice Mayor. I'm going to log off and someone is going to tell me when to log back on. So thank you very much.
All right, on the public hearing A1, first we have a presentation on the proposed amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance to establish a new urban place form district, associated code changes, and related map amendment that proposed to rezone approximately 122 acres of property. We have urban planner Vidalia Sadvika. He will now present the items, and then we will hold 2 public hearings, one for the proposed text amendment and then a second for the proposed map amendments. Planning and Urban Design Director Todd Oakland Cheney is also here if you have any questions.
Good evening. My name is Vidila Satvika with the Department of Planning and Urban Design. I'm here to present the Urban Place Form District. We've been working on this since 2018. If you can just go back one slide real quick. Just to highlight that it didn't actually begin there. The work actually comes from the Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan. And so that's the vision. And what we are proposing now is the regulatory part that would implement that vision. Next slide. So some key takeaways that I want you to consider. The Urban Place Form District is a zoning tool that will help to manage growth. As a growing city, we need to align development with our investments in transit. And these changes will help to increase transit access and reduce carbon emissions. And this proposal incentivizes affordable housing. Next slide. We are asking you to consider 2 actions. 1, to amend the Unified Development Ordinance in order to update this zoning district and associated codes. And 2, to rezone 122 acres of property. Next slide. So these are the goals that we've inherited from the city-adopted comprehensive plan. We want to accommodate a growing population and to support job growth. We want to integrate affordable housing closer to jobs. We're looking to improve connectivity with walkability that supports transit and to support a healthy environment with quality urban design that improves tree canopy and urban open spaces. Next slide. This image summarizes the goal of what we're trying to do really concisely. So on the left side of the screen, you see what is mostly in place today, which is large single-story, single-use, auto-oriented, suburban-style developments. And we're looking to begin to transition these with the zone, with the new zoning code, to lead to more walkable, mixed-use developments that include housing on appropriate parcels. We have the vision in the comp plan. Now we are looking to implement the zoning to align our goals so that we can achieve them. Next slide. A key benefit that we wanted to highlight is that the Urban Centers Initiative, along with the other comprehensive plan growth strategies, aim to increase transit ridership because we've invested a lot in our transit, and that those investments should help to reduce carbon emissions. Next slide. We've reached out to the public, and this is a summary of what we got back. The three takeaways are that they want to see walkability in this zoning district, trees, landscaping, and housing. And we believe that this code does that. Next slide. We conducted an equity toolkit analysis. This analysis was used to integrate explicit consideration of racial equity in decision-making. These were some of the things that we looked at. And a key finding was that the community nearest the Patton Avenue node had the highest Hispanic population, the lowest median income, and was the most vulnerable community nearest to a proposed urban center. And for that reason, as part of phase 2, we are recommending that node not move forward. Next slide. So now let's get into the proposed text amendments. So how are we proposing to change the code? First, we're building on Asheville's precedents. We have two zoning districts, the River Arts District Form Code and the Haywood Road Form Code, that include elements of what we're trying to achieve with the Urban Place Form Code. Essentially, it's mixed-use development that includes housing and tries to create walkable communities, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Next slide. These next slides point out the specific key elements, and I want to just read this purpose statement that captures what we're trying to do. The Urban Place Form District is intended to accommodate the development of higher density, mixed-use urban centers that are human-scaled. A greater emphasis on interconnectivity and efficient land use highlights the pedestrian-oriented focus, where mixing residential units with commercial activity, connects housing to jobs. Now, admittedly, the images that are shown on top here are probably larger in scale than we're likely to see, but that's the general intent. Next slide. We're hoping to create block structure by requiring buildings on streets. These two images are conceptual. They're not really any place here. On the left, you see some large parcels with single-story buildings. And what we're proposing in the code is if you want to further develop in that parcel, you need to either have a building placed on the street, or you need to build a street into the large parcel. So the next slide, you see that happening. And that creates the form of this urban code that allows for walkability and begins to break up the parcels to meet this and other goals. Next slide. A key component in form codes is the build to zone, which basically says that this is the area that you see on the screen, the gray area, that's closer to the street, where we try to encourage the buildings to be located so that they're close to the street where people are located when they're walking by. And we're suggesting that the code requires 70% of the buildings to be in this area, but we're trying to make it flexible to allow that driveways and any open spaces not have to be counted, to give development that flexibility. Next slide. Setbacks, typically in form-based codes, are very close to the street, so the setbacks are small. What we're doing is, again, allowing more flexibility by increasing that to 40 feet through talking with property owners who are concerned. And so you can increase your setback if you allow for pedestrian-oriented design near the front, like a plaza or outdoor seating. Next slide. The height in these urban centers would range between 4 and 6 stories for the maximum height, I'm sorry. The base height would be 4 stories, and we're saying that if you provide affordable housing, you could increase that 2 more stories up to 6 stories, so 75 feet. And to give you some context, in these zoning districts currently, we allow 5 to 7 stories. So we're in the same ballpark. Initially, the heights were higher, but because of community concern and respecting those concerns for blocking views and shadows, we brought it down a little bit. Next slide. So to provide the affordable housing and to get that bonus for the 2 stories, a project can provide those housing, can provide the affordability in one of 2 ways. One is that 20% of the units can be affordable to 80% area median income or less, or a much larger percentage, 80% of the total units can be affordable to 100% area median income or less. And this is because we discussed with the affordable housing interests, and it was clear that we needed to have that flexibility, again, to not be too restrictive. And we're suggesting that 25% of any affordable units must accept rental assistance, such as housing choice vouchers. And recently, council has recommended to change that to 50%, which we think makes sense in order to align it with the existing land use incentive grant, which was recently changed this last summer. And this benefit would help because, as you know, the housing choice vouchers serve those making 30 to 60% of the area median income. Next slide. We're proposing that commercial development, certain commercial development incentivizes housing. So what we're saying is that on the large parcels over 5 acres in size, that the maximum commercial building size is limited to 20,000 square feet. But that if a project or developer wants to exceed that amount, they just need to provide housing in order to do that. So first, let's look at who would be affected. Next slide, please. This slide shows the properties in this first phase that would be affected. The green parcels show the parcels that would be held to this higher standard for housing. So on Merriman Avenue, we have 1 parcel. On Tunnel Road North, 2 parcels. South Tunnel Road, 1 and 2 parcels on Bleachtree Boulevard. Next slide. So how would the housing incentive work? Basically, on these larger parcels, you would be capped at 20,000 square feet. But if you wanted more, you would have to provide either market rate units or affordable housing units. And if you provide the market rate units, for each market rate unit, you would be given an extra 1,000 square feet of commercial square footage. Whereas if you provide an affordable unit, you get more, so it's easier to reach your goals. You get 2,000 square feet of additional commercial square footage, and any mixture of the 2 would be allowed. And again, council recommended that the 50% rental assistance housing choice voucher standard should be applicable here as well, and we agree that that makes sense. Next slide. And finally, for the code, we're suggesting that the internal streets include sidewalks and street trees with rights-of-way that range from 30 to 56 feet. We think this is reasonable and in line effectively with what we have today on these sites, where the drive aisles and the sidewalks have rights-of-way effectively. They're not designated rights-of-way, but they function as rights-of-way. So this would help to formalize the pedestrian safety and make these sites more urban, and it would set the boundary of these sites to make them very clear. Next slide. So now let's look at the locations. Next slide. We are proposing to make these changes on 4 nodes in the city. The image shows the stars, which are the proposed urban centers in the future land use map in the growth scenario. And the ones that are circled are the ones that we are reviewing tonight. So now we'll look at them specifically. Next slide. First, on Merriman Avenue, we have approximately 21 acres that are basically at Merriman and Beaver Dam Road. Next slide. And we're proposing that these are currently all zoned highway business, as you can see on the left, and the image on the right shows that we're proposing that they move to Urban Place Form District. Next slide. On Tunnel Road, we have 40 acres. This is on the west side of Tunnel Road near Chun's Cove Road. The one parcel carved out was a conditional zoning, so we can't include that parcel. And the next slide. And these sites are proposed to be rezoned from regional business primarily to Urban Place Form District, as you see on the right. Next slide. Bleatree Boulevard. This is the largest node with 46 acres at Bleatree Boulevard, just off Swannanoa and bounded by the Swannanoa River. Next slide. And we are proposing to move the current zoning from river primarily, there's one parcel, it's commercial industrial, to Urban Place Form District. And then finally, we have the site at the former Sears site, which is approximately 17 acres. And next slide, that would move from regional business, as you see on the hatched on the left slide, to Urban Place Form District. 2 more slides and I'm done. So again, to reiterate the key takeaways that this Urban Place Form District, it's a zoning tool, and it would help us to implement this growth strategy of the city adopted comprehensive plan. And with a population of 95,000 people and growing, we know that we need to better align development with our investments in transit. This isn't a question of whether we're growing. We know the investment is coming, but how we will grow is really the question for tonight. Will we continue on a suburban pattern or move in this direction that supports walkability, transit, and these other goals that we're trying to seek? And housing is a key part, and we're in a serious housing crisis. We're looking to support housing by incentivizing it on those properties where it's most appropriate, those properties that can accommodate that added use, the larger parcels. Next slide. And finally, staff recommends that you approve these 2 actions to 1, amend the UDO establishing the Urban Place Form District, and 2, amend the zoning map to rezone the approximately 122 acres of property. We believe these actions are appropriate and necessary if we are to begin implementing our adopted comprehensive plan. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Council, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I have, I guess, a comment and some questions. One of the cons that's presented in the staff report is that zoning changes that encourage redevelopment will potentially increase property values over time that can increase neighboring property values. So early in your presentation, you indicated that the site on Patton Avenue was removed, giving concerns from the Emma community, and after utilizing the equity toolkit, you said that played a great role because of such a large Latinx community. I noticed that Innsbrook is in close proximity to East End community, which is an historically Black neighborhood. And while it isn't as African American as it used to be, the reason is because of urban renewal and, quite frankly, gentrification that has already taken place. So my question is, what is the difference really between the Kmart site on Patton Avenue and the Innsbrook Mall location, please?
Yeah, great question. First of all, I'd just like to say, over the overarching comment that is that we know investment's coming, right? We see it, and we're getting a lot of requests for new development. So again, I just want to focus that our overarching consideration is how do we want to see these areas change? So by supporting transit, we support individuals who don't have access to automobiles as much. We support walkability that supports transit. So that's an important consideration. But specifically on, the location, the Innsbrook Mall, it's important to note that there's a mountain between the Innsbrook Mall and the East End community. It's approximately a mile away. So the distance isn't that close. The Emma community and Patton is much closer. It's more like a quarter mile. And so it's not really next door. It really has a big boundary. And I think we would be more concerned about the impacts that would happen from downtown because, downtown is immediately adjacent to that community.
Could you not be concerned about both? It's as if I'd say someone has broken into my front door, so no need to lock my back door. So are we saying no need to worry about increasing property values or gentrification because it's already coming and we're already too far down the road? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think you make a great point that we need, I think long-term, and maybe Todd, Todd's been much more involved with the legacy neighborhoods, so he can speak on this. It's important to think about displacement. I think that's a key consideration that even in our an equity analysis, we realize that this is something we as a city need to consider more seriously. At the same time, whenever we have opportunities to influence development patterns, let's make sure that we do so in a way that guides it in a direction that is supportive to those most vulnerable. Todd, do you want to?
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
Todd O'Quitney, Planning and Urban Design Director. We're trying to collect more and more data in understanding the impacts of any type of development or zoning or any other decision that the city makes that might impact displacement within the city. Traditionally looking kind of historically at barriers, and we mentioned the mountain and tunnel barrier between the East End neighborhood and Tunnel Road. When we looked at like highway building in the 60s and 70s and did some research on that, you saw that highways that negatively impacted African-American communities and other communities of color disproportionately, the investment that would happen on one side of the highway often did not cross over that barrier of that highway within those neighborhoods. And that's kind of where the idea of that we have this large physical barrier with the mountain. So we're going on kind of some of the data that we have or historical data that we have about impacts of gentrification, displacement. However, going forward, what Vidila mentioned with the work we've been doing with the Legacy Neighborhoods Coalition and others in the community is that we are trying to develop these neighborhood stabilization strategies or anti-displacement strategies. And we hope to continue that progress over the next few months and be able to present those to council at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you.
This is Sage, Todd or Vidila. Thank you for the presentation. I know this has been a lot of years in the making as well, so I appreciate your work. I am curious if the Legacy Neighborhood Coalition had shared any input on this particular site, or I know they had concerns about the Kmart Plaza and that was pulled. Did they have concerns about the Innsbrook Mall?
The president of the neighborhood association indicated that they were not going to vote to have any, I guess, formal input from the community, on the Innsbrook Mall site. And to date, we've been working with representatives from that neighborhood that are part of the Legacy Neighborhoods Coalition. And primarily the concerns that we had heard were only for the Patton Avenue site. I don't want to speak, for every individual that lives in that neighborhood, but just wanted to mention some of those observations.
I had personal conversations with some folks who live there. I grew up in that neighborhood, so there are concerns.
Any other comments or questions?
Yes, one question I have is, I just wonder, how key is the participation of private property owners in ensuring that this urban village is a success? And how, and I just wanted to know what type of feedback are you getting from some of the owners? Are they amenable to it, or, you know, whatever? Do you think it'll be an easy transition, or what are some things we need to look out for? Maybe you could just help me with that, because I would say, you know, because I would say with this private property ownership is an issue all over the country right now. And I was just wondering, what are you receiving from the people that are pretty much that own the properties?
Thank you for that. We've been meeting with property owners for really since we began this in 2018, and we've made lots of changes since we started, both through property owner input and community group input. So we've tried to be very responsive, and at the same time maintaining city goals. At a certain point, you know, if you give up too much in the vision, you have to ask, are you achieving your goals? And so we feel like we have sort of given a lot of flexibility in order to make these much more palatable to, I would say, the conventional pattern of development, which is suburban, you know, this model that I've outlined that we're trying to move away from. But when that is a large part of how you do business, it can be like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. And I get the sense from some property owners that there's still this you know, concern that this doesn't work easily. So it's a challenge. You know, we and like you're suggesting, you know, everywhere are trying to see how we can move our communities in patterns of development that we all have goals for walkability, bikeability, transit, better development. But it may take a while, and we may have some growing pains.
And just to piggyback on Vidilla's too, that statements, for these larger sites over 5 acres, likely due to the size of these properties and the amount of development that would be proposed on some of these individual sites, we think likely many of these sites would be conditional zoning type of application. And basically that would mean that City Council would evaluate the future development of these sites on a case-by-case basis. And that would give council and staff an opportunity to, you know, apply the code, but it also allows the developer the option or flexibility to possibly deviate from some of the requirements of the code and really, you know, evaluate these projects on a case-by-case basis with specific conditions for each of those properties. So just wanted to mention that due to the sizes of these larger parcels, that would trigger, you know, likely trigger that conditional zoning review anyway.
And one other question I have is, okay, and take in consideration, if these 4 properties that you've identified, if they were opted into your vision, as far as how many affordable units would you anticipate, and what is the time frame before we can see those units available to the community?
Well, that's a tricky question because it would depend on how big of commercial projects that they are building. So again, for those sites that are 5 acres or larger, the number of housing units would be set based not only on the size of the total square footage of the commercial, but also on the amount of affordable units that they're providing. And so there's so many variables we can't say. How I can respond is that we try to write the code in a way that doesn't require a high number of units, knowing that we didn't want to be too restrictive, right? We're trying to begin more mixed-use development in Nashville, and the idea was, let's begin lightly with the knowledge that perhaps if a project is having to incorporate housing through their own financial analysis, they'll come to their own decision-making for how much makes the most sense. Because after all, if you're having to pour concrete for the foundations and do all this work, although you may only be required for your project to do 20 units, it may be in better financial interest to do 50 or 75 or 100. And we thought that's where we should allow the market to make that decision.
Thank you.
I see Sage has a question as well.
Mostly more of a comment, because I'm hearing these concerns and I'm empathetic to them. I'm over here thinking about land use in general and the history of how we've gotten here. So I recall 3 or 4 years ago being on the Affordable Housing Committee and talking about these affordable strategies. And, I want to echo Mr. Zatvika's concerns that we know that growth is coming. I don't know that anybody can live in Asheville in recent years and not feel that we're growing fast and that there's a lot of pressure to build and grow. And if we don't plan for where that makes sense and where those nodes are and where we can fit it, I think we're going to end up continuing to see it pop up everywhere, kind of like Crossroads or the Bluffs. And the demand is here. So in the last few years, I've watched us collectively and through numerous community meetings and input sessions kind of aim towards where would that growth go. And every time one of those projects came to us for review, we'd say, well, this is why we're working on the urban centers, because we know we have big growth coming and we need mixed use and we need multifamily. Where should it go? And that's why we picked these nodes. So I really appreciate that we did the equity toolkit, that we recognize that there are some impacts to perhaps the Patton Avenue location that have been removed. I'm sensitive to what Councilwoman Mosley is saying about the East End and impacts there. And I also think, we have to make a move on this if it's time. So there, we can always adjust things. We can always amend. We can always revisit. If we find that these regulations put on these particular parcels are too much for that developer, I think there was another good point made that you still have the conditional zoning process, and some of these inherently might be going through that anyways. So in general, I think I'm personally in support of the urban centers. I'm in support of transit-oriented development, intentional planning where we can link housing with groceries and stores and shops and transit lines and hospitals and the access to like basic community needs. And I think that, some of the things that I've seen in this that maybe didn't get mentioned were pretty smart to say, right now in Asheville, if you want to build more than 50 apartments at a time, you have to come to council. And this raises the threshold in the urban place zoning to 80. So we're encouraging that without that extra review process of council. And, I think there's some opportunity and variety in how some of the internal streets can work. So, maybe there's still plenty here that can be grabbed and that without the exactness be done in conditional zoning. So in some ways, it's like everything else we've been doing recently. We could put it in place and revisit it in 6 months. I think a lot of effort and planning and coordination with the community has gone into this far. So, I wanted to share my support for it. And I also understand some of these other concerns from my fellow councilwoman. Thank you. And thank you to staff for all the work and so many community volunteers. I feel like we've been talking about this one for a very long time.
Kim.
So in hearing this presentation today and thinking of our Close the Gap process where we're addressing greenways, accessibility, and pedestrian infrastructure, and looking at the themes of our comprehensive plan, I look back at the Urban Centers text amendment that we're considering for the motion. And I'm wondering under section 4 where it says make streets more walkable, comfortable, and connected. Is there a reason to not include accessible? And if so, if it can be done, would we not address accessibility at this moment?
No, I think that's just, it was just a word choice. I think that's the intention.
So I would say let's get explicit and include that this is not just for folks who ride the bus and who walk and who ride their bikes. And let's include accessibility.
Absolutely.
All right, if there are no more comments, we will open up the public hearing on the proposed changes to the UDO that would establish the new Urban Place Forum District. Staff will connect live calls from our speaker queue. Callers, you will first hear staff inform council that you are next to speak. Then you will hear an automated message letting you know that you are unmuted and live in the meeting. You may begin speaking after the automated message. If you accidentally drop out the speaker queue, just redial the number and the meeting code, press *3 and rejoin the speaker queue. You have 3 minutes to comment, and at the end of the 3 minutes, you would hear a bell and staff will let you know that you need to wrap up your comment. Staff, any callers?
Yes, Wyatt Stevens will be our first caller.
Attached to that letter before you vote to approve this district.
Wyatt, if
Although
you can,
city staff,
Wyatt, if you can hear me, I need
Yes.
you to start over. You were cut off just a bit, so start from the top.
okay, hopefully I have my full 3 minutes. Vice Mayor Smith and members of council, this is Wyatt Stevens. I represent Ingalls Markets. I emailed each of you a letter earlier today that I would ask you to consider before you vote to approve this district. Although city staff has been working on this for 3 years, it's not ready to be applied to any properties in our city. I would urge you to vote against it this evening or postpone your vote until staff has a chance to deliver a workable code. At stake are fundamental private property rights. At stake are neighborhood shopping centers that for the most part have served our community well. A vote in favor of creating and applying this new untried voting district will be unlawful and it will be counterproductive. As a city, we want to encourage redevelopment of these centers. We want to see new, more energy efficient buildings. We want more walkability, more accessibility, more sidewalks, more transit stops. We want more green space and more trees. And yes, we want more housing in the city of Asheville. These are laudable goals, but they have to take into account the character of the land and the practical realities of private property owners redeveloping these sites with their own money and without any help from the city. The city staff has failed to take into account the character of these properties. We're not talking about raw, undeveloped land. These are existing, established commercial shopping centers. They have existing infrastructure, including water, sewer, and stormwater, that would restrict the ability to locate buildings wherever you want. And none of these sites are level. All of them have cuts and fills, and many have retaining walls and other constraints that make new construction very challenging. As I mentioned before, I would encourage you to consider the lawful nature or unlawful nature of this. It's an unfunded mandate to build residential housing on property currently zoned and being used as commercial shopping centers. Cities in our state can only exercise those powers which are granted by the legislature. The city has no legislative authority for this mandate. This is a city-initiated rezoning. None of the property owners asked for it, and none of them agree with it. To my knowledge, none of the neighbors or neighborhoods around these shopping centers asked for it either. I suspect many folks would like to see these centers redeveloped, especially Innsbrook, with new buildings, new landscaping, new sidewalks. all of which would be required under the current zoning. But a mandate which fails to take into account the characteristics of these sites and attempts to require private property owners to build something they don't want and that won't work is doomed to fail. We have tried to negotiate in good faith with the city staff to come up with a reasonable, workable code we could live with, and we have made some progress. Thank you.
Staff, is there another caller?
Our next caller is Gerald Green. Stand by.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, and a special hello to the city clerk. This is Gerald Green, 28 Eastwood Village Boulevard, 28803. The goal of the Urban Place Forum District is a good vision for the city 10 to 15 years in the future. The challenge is how to get from the current reality of existing development patterns to the vision that the Urban Place Forum District implements. The draft ordinance does not address this challenge. It attempts to move the development pattern from the current suburban standard to a highly urban standard in one giant step, irrespective of market forces, site constraints, and impacts on surrounding uses. The challenges include mandate for mix of use. Use mix is a challenge in the development or redevelopment. Are you hearing me?
Yes, sir, we hear you fine.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Our redevelopment properties influenced by site location, site size, and characteristics of the surrounding market area. An ordinance mandate for the mix of uses will limit the development, redevelopment potential properties and serve to stifle development rather than promote it. Impact of the loss of existing commercial nodes on the surrounding suburban neighborhoods. Residents of the surrounding neighborhoods access existing commercial nodes by walking, biking, or a short drive. Converting an established commercial nodes to primarily residential urban developments will impact the convenient access to services and retail enjoyed by residents of the surrounding area. Sidewalk width on primary streets. While wide sidewalks can enhance pedestrian activity, providing 18-foot wide sidewalks will be challenging on relatively small properties. Additional thought must be given to the imposition of these standards to smaller properties. Pedestrian connections to surrounding areas. An admirable aspiration of the proposed Urban Place Forum District is to create pedestrian-friendly nodes. Thought must be given to pedestrian connections to surrounding areas. Connected street systems. While enhancing traffic flow and creating an urban feel within these developments, this standard will consume a significant portion of land area on the smaller parcels identified for rezoning. The requirement that streets be designed as a grid system does not consider the built and natural features of the property identified for the urban place designation. Development of the urban grid system on these properties, particularly the smaller ones, will be challenging. Reduced parking requirements. These are visionary and reflect a transit-oriented, pedestrian-friendly environment. Unfortunately, the properties identified for the urban place designation are not in transit-oriented, pedestrian-friendly areas. The vision for their Place Forum District must acknowledge the need for parking in the foreseeable future. Impact on existing uses. Targeted properties have been developed over a number of years in compliance with the development standards in place at the time of construction. The proposed urban place standards will make the existing development non-conforming, erasing the years of adherence to zoning and development standards. A more gradual process of transitioning to the new development pattern must be identified. The proposed Urban Place Forum District codifies a bold vision by planners for the future development of the identified properties. One of the challenges of being a planner is that others must be relied upon to implement the vision, typically property owners and developers. In order for the vision to be implemented, the vision must be shared. To achieve the shared vision, just continue to work together. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is John Palmer. John, your line is now open.
Hi, my name is John Palmer. I live at 221 South Plains Drive, 28803. I'm a licensed North Carolina State Certified General Appraiser, and I hold both the MAI and CCIM designations. I'm also licensed in South Carolina and Virginia. I've been a licensed realtor for 43 years and a licensed appraiser for 18, and I've done over 1,500 appraisals of various residential and commercial properties. My expertise is complex valuation assignments, typically having to do with impact studies or project feasibility analysis. I've worked on projects such as Nanahail Outdoor Center, the Red Tip Greenway, and the Augusta Rails to Trails project. I have appraised a multitude of retail and mixed-use properties across these 3 states area, both existing and proposed. I'm also an expert witness in various real estate valuation matters, including eminent domain and proposed project impact studies. There are several reasons that I have that the proposed urban place form district would likely have negatively affect properties located in the district, including limiting development opportunities, limiting potential future property investment, and limiting potential land uses on the properties proposed to be included in the zoning district. Many of the identified parcels have been improved with uses that have been in existence for many years and have served to improve the neighborhoods where they are located. They were developed by the property owners based on economic goals, including long-term investment in the neighborhood and community and the ability to adapt and readapt their property based on market perspectives. The Urban Place Form District proposes to place very limiting restrictions on development opportunities on properties within the district on any new developments or redevelopments. And if adopted in its present form, I believe it will have a negative effect on both potential development and redevelopment, as well as negatively impacting the appeal to potential property investors. In addition, rigid requirements in the proposed district will limit or in some cases eliminate several potential redevelopment or sales opportunities available to property owners under current zoning regulations. Although there are some accommodations based on a mixed-use concept that includes affordable housing, it is my professional opinion that the proposed district limitations contemplated for and imposed on new development or redevelopment will have likely negative impacts on the financial feasibility of potential projects. It is my belief that the proposed Urban Place Form District is adopted in its present form, developers and property investors will gravitate to neighboring or competing communities, where a less rigid regulatory environment allows them to more quickly develop projects to meet market demand with less risk and lower overall costs. I strongly urge you to reconsider the adoption of Urban Place Form District in its current form. Thank you very much for your time.
Council, our next caller is Vicky Meath.
I'm Vicky Meath from West Asheville. I want to start off by saying that I applaud efforts to use zoning regulations to encourage high-density housing and mixed-use development with affordable units on transit corridors. We have an affordable housing crisis in this community. Low vacancy rates are one indication of that. In yesterday's Asheville Citizen Time article, Patrick Bowen was quoted as saying, quote, "Based on our survey of apartments in the first half of 2021, it appears market rate rental housing vacancy rates in the Asheville area have dropped below 2%, particularly the more modest priced product. The problem is worse among more affordable rentals, such as tax credit and government subsidized housing, where vacancy rates are generally below 0.5%, and most properties have wait lists," end quote. Asheville is the most expensive place to rent in the state, yet our wages are not keeping pace with other metro areas. The bottom line is that we need more affordable housing, and there are limited places in the city of Asheville where we can build it. We need you to continue to fight for affordable housing using every tool available. We need to continue to fight so that people who have housing vouchers have someplace to use them. And we have to continue to fight to define affordable housing in terms that are relevant to the workforce in this community. I want to name that while we need housing units at 80% AMI, a full-time 40-hour-a-week worker would need to make over $20 an hour to be able to afford those units. And at 60% AMI, a worker would need to make over $15 an hour. We need housing at these levels and lower. Voucher acceptance helps us get there. And I encourage you to continue to work diligently to help us get to where we need to be when it comes to affordable housing. Thank you very much.
Council, we're going to try to go back to Craig Justice. Craig, your line is now open.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Craig Justice. I'm here on behalf of Avon Associates and Ingalls Market. relating to the urban place district rezoning for Merriman Avenue. 100 years ago, approximately, the city of Asheville adopted zoning. In the 100 years since the city adopted zoning, to my knowledge, and I've researched it, there's been no instance where the city has used zoning to mandate a ratio of uses on private property, meaning to tell a property owner that your menu of choices are narrowed down to one. In this case, these are traditionally commercial areas. They have been developed as commercial, at least going back to the 50s. To say now for any redevelopment to upgrade buildings, to make sure they are not obsolescent, to make sure that at the end of the day, you can modernize your location, your choices at these locations, including Merriman, are limited to a mixed commercial and residential housing product. This is never been done before in the city of Asheville. It is unprecedented. I'm not aware of it being done in the entire state of North Carolina. I've been a land use lawyer for 30 years. There's never, to my knowledge, been an ordinance in the entire state that mandates what the city is mandating with this urban place. The Asheville planning director called what you're doing the big stick. This was the comment made to P&Z. We have submitted a letter of today's date in response to the big stick. We have respectfully pointed out the various defects, both legal, social, practical, and political, of what staff is asking you to do. We've included 3 affidavits from experts in the field, including Gerald Green, who you've heard, John Palmer, who you've heard, and Jeffrey Brown, who's a civil engineer. Please, I would ask you to read that letter and the supporting affidavits. At the end of the day, when you look at Merriman Avenue, this is an area that has been developed for 50 years or more with zoning rules that were in place, and developer followed those rules, and they invested millions of dollars in following those rules. What you're telling the property owners today is that what we thought was smart growth for over 50 years is apparently not smart enough. And so moving forward, you have to accommodate this new vision. And the question that Mrs. Kilgore asked, which was the appropriate question, is there landowner support? The answer is no.
Thank you for your comments, caller. That's time.
Our next caller is Clyde Holt. Clyde, your line is now open.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am Clyde Holt of the Raleigh office of Fox Rothschild. My partner Tom Terrell and I speak for American Finance Trust, owner of property within the Riverbend area proposed for the Urban Creek Center classification. Tom and I salute the announced goals of the Urban Place Form Zoning District, but question the proposed methods for achieving the same. It appears that your planners believe that all they have to do is to announce a desired change in development patterns and that it will happen. This is without regard to the realities of the market, the realities of lender demands, title insurance company requirements, or physical conditions on the ground. The result very well in Asheville may be more vacant, underutilized sites where the owner is not allowed to renovate, upgrade, redevelop because financing for the planner envisioned urban place form is not available, or because conditions on the ground make it impractical, if not impossible. It seems city planners attempt to address such impracticality, impossibility of compliance issues somewhat by their new language in section 717.1 C4 distinguishing lawful nonconformities from mere nonconformities for non-construction purposes. But what does this mean? If the bank possessing a lien on property or who has acquired the property following a foreclosure files for redevelopment or renovation or upgrade, is compliance with the new guidelines not required? I doubt this is what city planners intend, but that is what the new language seems to say. Lifestyle mixed-use commercial centers are certainly by many considered to be aesthetically pleasing and often are financially successful to the property owner. But such are not practical on every piece of commercial property at every location in Asheville. Successful lifestyle centers result from cooperation between property owners and city planners, usually in the form of the property owner taking advantage of code incentives offered by the regulators rather than by imposed zoning restrictions and mandates. The city staff analysis for the Urban Place Form District asserts that the text change and accompanying rezoning incentivize the integration of market rate and affordable housing on large commercial parcels. But where are the incentives? Following this text change and rezoning of properties, development, redevelopment on commercial sites exceeding 20,000 square feet are prohibited unless housing is created. But I repeat, where are the incentives? The city would allow you to improve and expand your property if you do what the planners want, create housing, but otherwise no expansion or improvement is allowed. This is not incentive-based zoning, this is a downzoning. The taking away of current vested rights and offering to return them only if the property owner complies with the new burdensome regulations. Similarly, the new regulations will require changes to establish. All right, we'll save the rest of my presentation.
Council, our next caller is Karen Ramshaw. Karen, your line is now open.
Hi, thank you. My name is Karen Ramshaw. I live in Buncombe County between the new prison and the new landfill. And before I start my remarks, I have to say it is difficult for me to process the hypocrisy of hearing how we need to add this type of dense, walkable, transit-friendly development after staff did not support the 101 Charlotte Street project and not a single member of council called staff to account to ask them to defend that decision. But let's move on. I agree we need to encourage a new development pattern on our primary corridors. We need more mixed use and urban density, but I don't believe Asheville is well served by the way our staff approaches development. The level of minutia contained in this plan is astounding. They say the devil is in the details. Well, this proposed code is sprinkled with very specific, sometimes oddly specific requirements. There are 44 pages and 12 of them are about signage. Is this necessary? Appropriate? Line 2.1a. A lobby with a minimum width of 20 feet must be provided along the street-facing building facade at the level of the adjoining sidewalk with a depth of at least 10 feet. Why? Is there some golden mean classical lobby proportion we should all aspire to? Not to mention, nothing kills life on the street like a long, boring expanse of lobby. And the reason these details are problematic is that each one becomes a hill for some city staffer or community member to die on. Developers now have to have lawyers on the team to help navigate the process with the city. Are we getting anything better because of this? And I've heard people mention the variance. This is not a reasonable, straightforward process. It's 2 years of your life you'll never get back. And what about money? Some years ago, staff ran performas assuming a private developer used Luigi funds and fee rebates in return for providing affordability. The city's calculations show that the developer of a 224-unit project with 20% affordability at 80% of AMI would lose $1.6 million in revenue over 20 years. And at 60% AMI, the developer would lose over $5 million. This is city-generated data. And then this proposed code adds a myriad of other restrictions and requirements. The city may not have to perform in financial reality, but the rest of us do. There are a number of reasons we can't get more affordability here in Asheville. NIMBYism, powerful single-family residential interests, cost of building, and topography. But the city process and ordinances like these are not an insignificant factor. So what are the trade-offs? If the developer is losing millions in one area of the project, money needs to be made up in others. So you may get the 1,000 square foot retail space more suitable for a local business, but rent is beyond reach. It's just math. And the requirements of this proposed code is likely to mean that the design of our city will be in the hands of deep-pocketed regional and national developers. Welcome to Anywhere USA. We deserve better than this.
Council, our next caller is Patrick Gilbert. Patrick, your line is open.
My name is Patrick Gilbert. I live in East Asheville, and I'm the Government Relations Chair for the Coalition of Asheville Neighborhoods. Good evening, Mayor, City Council members, City Manager, and City staff. On behalf of the Coalition of Asheville Neighborhoods, I'm calling to support the Urban Place Form District Zoning Text Amendment and to urge its adoption along with the Urban Place Form District Zoning Map Amendment of Phase 1 of the Urban Centers Initiative. CAN endorses the objectives of urban centers, including the establishment of form-based standards to encourage mixed-use development in walkable areas, the link to transit, as well as incentivizing construction of more housing units, especially affordable housing, as part of larger commercial developments. Equally important, I want to acknowledge and publicly thank Vidila Sadvika, Stacy Merton, Shannon Tuck, and Todd Oklachaney from the Department of Planning and Urban Design for their willingness to engage CAN in negotiating changes to the originally proposed text amendment that will significantly lessen the impact of high-density mixed-use developments on adjacent residential neighborhoods. Although CAN did not achieve all that it sought in the text amendment changes, we strongly feel that the current ordinance language before you will still allow long-established residential neighborhoods and future urban centers to exist in harmony and to bring a better balance to the Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan. Thank you very much, and thank you for your public service.
Council, our next caller is Martin Friddy. Martin, your line is now open.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. My name is Martin Friddy. I'm the president of Magnolia Property Group. We're a commercial real estate development firm from Greenville, South Carolina. We've done quite a bit of work in Asheville over the years, including various projects on Airport Road, one being a large box, as y'all would call it, the Hobby Lobby, which I guess that was actually in the county, but we did annex the front of the property into the city. My concern with this proposed ordinance is big box retail, whatever term you want to use. It's very difficult to do it. Asheville needs a place to have those types of developments. Asheville's already very challenging with land costs, topography, and permitting. Secondly, I think this proposed ordinance is taking private property rights without consideration, as it diminishes private property rights by mandating multifamily development and reducing commercial. It also seems to pick winners and losers, and by that I mean this ordinance is picking specific properties and holding them to this standard, while an adjacent property may not be held to those same standards, which to me that's the city picking winners and losers and spot zoning, taking away someone's property rights, where your next door neighbor could then do whatever he wants under the original zoning ordinance. It's market manipulation. I think anytime a municipality tries to, or even a private developer for that matter, tries to create a certain type of development that the market is not ready for, or that the market will not handle, it doesn't work. The proposed ordinance, it does not incentivize developers to build multifamily. It disincentivizes developers to redevelop commercial property. It's going to increase the cost to develop the property. That cost will ultimately be passed on to the consumer. The ordinance seems to be geared towards solving the problem of affordable housing and transit issues, which I think is great and certainly needs to be addressed, but it seems to be placing the burden of solving that on the backs of commercial property owners at their expense. While again, no incentives for that. It's a sledgehammer. It also for existing property owners that have existing buildings to take away the option of redeveloping that building and adaptive reuse of their property to require multifamily and reduce the size of their building is, again, it's taking away property rights. I think that the city should take a step back and evaluate this separately.
Council, our next caller is Mike Sewell. Mike, your line is open.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. On behalf of Asheville on Bikes, whose mission it is to cultivate the culture of urban and commuter riding through advocacy, education, and celebration, because we believe that cycling has a direct impact on the health of our community, I encourage you to vote to approve the Urban Place Forum District. Historically, AOB's input has been limited exclusively to issues of transportation, and we've been breaking with that tradition and stretching a bit because we acknowledge that land use issues are a component of a robust, active transportation network. Tonight's Urban Place Forum District is the next immediate opportunity to highlight the interconnectedness of mixed-use, dense development and active transportation options, both of which are identified as the City of Asheville's goals in its comprehensive plan, Living Asheville. The type of development which will result from the Urban Place Forum District will intensify the proximity to goods and services people need. The distance to the market, the doctor's office, the school, employment can all exist within a mile, maybe 2 mile circle. Proximity, when coupled with sidewalks, transit, bicycle facilities, it reduces people's dependence on automobiles. And this type of development has a direct impact on our most vulnerable road users. AOB advocates for bicycle facilities, not simply for bikeability's sake, but rather as an investment in the health of our community. We understand the Urban Place Forum District to be the next investment in the vitality of our city and its people. In a nutshell, we've got the comprehensive plan. That's the vision. If you support the vision, the next responsible step is to adopt the policy that actualizes it. Thank you for your time, your commitment to the city. Good luck.
Council, our next caller is John Spake. John, your line is now open.
Good evening, Council. My name is John Spake. I'm a native of Asheville and have practiced commercial real estate for 30 years in our hometown here. I want to give you a little history lesson. This whole process I've been involved with for 35 months now, and it's kind of like deja vu. Back in 2000, I represented a client out of Florida, Gulfside Development, and we purchased the Gerber baby food plant in South Asheville after Gerber decided to leave Asheville due to water costs. And before we bought the property, we were under contract, we went to City Council and they understood that half of the building had low ceilings and was not useful for current manufacturing or storage. And they voted 7-0 to allow us to rezone that property half highway business and half industrial. We kept half the building and tore down the other half and had a 24-acre site. A big box retailer came and wanted to go on the site. We went back to the same City Council and they turned down the big box. So we met with staff afterwards and said, we came to you, we told you what we want to do. You said, okay, we wrote the check. And then you said, no, what do you want us to do with our property? And Alan Glines was your planner at that time that was assigned to our situation. And he said, the city has this great idea called urban villages. And we would like to start a code with you and try to build a code of urban villages. And we worked on that for a long period of time, more than 6 months, probably less than a year. And the City Council applied that to the front 7 acres of Gerber Village. And my client spent $18 million building Gerber Village. We expressed concerns throughout the process of flaws in the code and how it didn't meet the real world requirements that we see every day in commercial development. But they didn't listen to us and they approved it. Parking was a major issue because it required public streets through the property and a roundabout. And that property ended up failing for lack of parking. Tenants would not go there because the parking ratio is too low. My clients lost that property back to the bank and lost millions of dollars of equity. Another client of mine who became a client of mine bought that property from the bank, came back to city council, explained the situation. City council reverted it back to highway business. She removed the on-street parking, parallel parking, and removed the roundabout because highway business allowed her to do that. Picked up about 40 extra parking spaces. And guess what? The thing's working fine. It's about 90% occupied. It is still, the last time I sold it was still $4 million less than the cost originally on it. So my problem is this is an unproven tool, just like urban villages were. And if the tool is so good, put it in the toolbox and let developers choose from it, but don't force it on more property owners, as it did my clients at Gerber, to make them the guinea pigs. You can get a lot more with incentives and encouraging than mandating. Thank you very much.
Council, our final caller for this topic is Jeffrey Brown. Jeffrey, your line is open.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. My name is Jeffrey Brown. I live in Fairview, North Carolina. I'm a professional civil engineer in Asheville. I was previously mentioned by Mr. Craig Justice. I've worked with Van Winkle and Robert Stevens in looking at the urban place zoning as it's being proposed relative to the existing retail parcels in North Asheville along Merriman Avenue. I issued a report, and I believe you all have that, but my report and findings conclude that there are existing site constraints along Merriman Avenue corridor, and particularly to the proposed urban place site in North Asheville, that makes this impracticable, and unreasonable to develop in accordance with the proposed urban place zone standards. The existing constraints include existing utilities, right-of-way for utilities, the numerous parcels and numerous owners, the NCDOT right-of-way, the NCDOT roadway, and the existing buildings on the property. My report is analysis of in my report, there's analysis of the developability and preliminary costs to develop the Save More and Steinmark tracts. Although my focus was a sampling taken from these sites, my overall conclusions would be applicable to other sites within the Merriman Avenue corridor due to the presence of the existing buildings, regulatory constraints imposed by the urban place criteria. Effectively, I'd like to conclude this with, based upon my experience as a civil engineer in this marketplace, it's my opinion that the redevelopment of the Merriman Avenue corridor, utilizing the urban place proposed design criteria, would be impractical and most likely not to achieve a reasonable investment on return, particularly because the cost analysis, including raising the existing retail and business offices to provide a clean slate for the site, where the analysis provided a cost estimate in excess of $27 million to redevelop those tracts. Thank you for your time.
With no more comments, we'll close the public hearing. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt the amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance to establish the new urban place form district?
This is Sage. I'll move.
Is there a second?
This is Gwen. I'll second.
All right, now we will vote. Council, I will state your name. Please say A or nay, aye or nay, to approve the motion. Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
Councilwoman Kilgore.
Nay.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Nay.
And myself, Vice Mayor, aye. That motion carries. Now we have public hearing A2. This public hearing is to rezone approximately 122 acres of property to Urban Place Forum District and associated changes to the future land use map. The presentation already reviewed. The presentation's already been reviewed about those rezoning sites. Are there any more questions or comments? With no more questions or comments, we'll now open the public hearing on this item. Staff, do you have any callers in the speaker queue?
Yes, our first caller is Wyatt Stevens. Mr. Stevens, your line is open.
Vice Mayor Smith and members of council, now that you've at least at this point voted 4-2 in favor of this code, I would suggest you follow John Spake's suggestion. Leave it as a tool in the toolbox. Have it available so that if a developer of any of these parcels or any other parcel in the city wants to sit down with staff and follow through this code and build the vision that staff has, it will be available for that purpose. There's a lot of good in there. There's a lot that is not good, in my opinion, but I would encourage you to do that, and I would encourage you not to apply this code to any of the 3 nodes that are proposed this evening. First, I want to talk about the Merriman Avenue node. Jeffrey Brown did an excellent job explaining from a civil engineering perspective why that won't work. All you have to do is imagine the sinkhole that develops every couple of years in the storm drain that runs in front of the Fresh Market to know that you have some real challenges on that particular property. You also have challenges across the street at the Merriman Avenue Ingalls. It's a 6.1 acre site, but if you impose this code and Ingalls wanted to replace that older building with a new building, which would be great, under this code, they would have to build it on the street, which is not possible because on the street is fill with a retaining wall. So the alternative would be to build it where it is. And then they would have to build a new public street in front of that building, taking what is now a 23-foot wide drive aisle and expand it to between 38 and 56 feet. It would be a road to nowhere that would make absolutely no sense. They would also have to build 50-plus residential units. Where would you fit those on the property? Where would you park the residents? What would the neighbors of North Asheville have to say about those residents on that parcel, pulling out onto Merriman and onto Beaver Dam? Let's talk about the Tunnel Road Ingalls, which, by the way, Ingalls plans to lease to another tenant if they are allowed to develop the Innsbrook site. The Tunnel Road Ingalls is located on a 7.4 acre parcel, 2 acres of which is a very steep slope that is impossible to build on. If you look at the footprint that's included in the materials that I provided, you will see that where the Ingalls is located with the parking and then the gas station, there's no room. There's certainly no room to move the Ingalls onto Tunnel Road. So again, you would have to build a brand new road to nowhere. The bottom line, ladies and gentlemen.
Council, our next caller is Craig Justice. Craig, your line is now open.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we sure can.
All right. As you know, I represent Avon Partners in Ingalls Markets relating to the Merriman Avenue corridor properties. I would ask that council take each node in question and vote on them separately. I think it's highly inappropriate to lump all these properties together as if one size fits all. When you look at Merriman Avenue, and I've provided a lot of detail in the letter along with the affidavits from the 3 experts, Merriman Avenue is made up of 13 parcels with 9 different property owners. The largest parcel is 6 acres. Most of them are way less than 6 acres. And at the end of the day, the urban place standards are not feasible for Merriman Avenue. The only evidence you have in the record as to feasibility is from Jeffrey Brown, civil engineer. And there is nothing that indicates from the city staff that urban place will work for Merriman Avenue. The success stories that the staff would like to point to are for areas that have a lot more acreage, a lot more raw land to start with, and a commonality of developer. That's not what we have for Merriman Avenue. Ms. Kilgore again asked the appropriate questions. Is there landowner support? There is none. How easy is it to develop? After 3 years and begging the staff to eliminate Merriman Avenue from the consideration, you heard staff say, we just went as far as we could in negotiating. At the end of the day, staff is saying we have to build in public streets into small acreage properties, public streets of potentially 50 feet of right-of-way. How is it possible there will be land to be able to redevelop with that requirement? Parking is necessary. Parking is vital. John Spake has spoken to that about Gerber Village. I would ask you respectfully, again, to take each node separately. Look at Merriman Avenue and ask yourself, can the urban place standards actually work there if a developer really wanted to do it, even though you are limiting the number of developers that will come in for those locations because of the requirements of mixed use and the building of streets, etc. Again, I would ask that you look at Merriman and look at it with the characteristics that are there when the only evidence in the record is that the urban place standards will not work. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Gerald Green. Mr. Green, your line is open.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, members of council. I have no further comments other than to reiterate what Mr. Stevens and Mr. Justice said, especially with regard to the Merriman Avenue properties. I think these would be difficult to develop under the proposed standards. And thank you for your time.
Council, our next caller is Jeffrey Brown. Jeffrey, your line is now open.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Well, the only additional comment I would like to make, and I would like to, again, support Mr. Craig Justice and Mr. Stevens' comments, particular to the North Asheville properties. But, you know, Mr. Stevens makes an incredible point about that existing stormwater system that should be noted. That all the stormwater from the ridge line, from Kimberly and Lakeshore Drive, all drains down and collects in front of the Save More Steinmart property, and then runs parallel with the Fresh Market Park property, and then eventually travels and discharges into Beaver Lake. And as was stated earlier, that particular line, it's a large line. It collects a lot of customers, not just on particular parcels, but the greater area of the Merriman Avenue corridor. And so I just want to iterate for that particular piece, that's a very large piece in terms of the civil engineering analysis of the developability of that property specific to the urban place design criteria. Beyond that, thank you for your time, and that's all I have.
Council, our next caller is John Palmer. Mr. Palmer, your line is open.
Hello again. I would also like to reiterate what Mr. Justice and Mr. Stevens said. An evaluation scenario that we're talking about here, each one of those properties has different attributes than an appraiser looks at. Part of it has to do with what's allowed and what's possible, but it also relates to the financial feasibility of what you have. Each one of them is zoned a little bit differently, and therefore they have different attributes. If you expect somebody to come in and put that much money into a property like that, they're going to be looking for a return. And if the costs are so great that they can't get a decent return, they're going to go elsewhere. It will also affect the adjacent properties. In a situation where if they're not redeveloped, then you get into a situation of what is the value of the surrounding properties. My concern in all this is that I don't think that that part of this equation has been well thought out. And that's kind of where my evaluation expertise comes in. There's different uses for that property, but if you start putting these kind of restrictions on them, such as heights, you get into an equation for the feasibility of the project. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you, and I hope you have a good evening. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Clyde Holt. Clyde, your line is now open.
Thank you. Once again, I am Clyde Holt with the Fox Rothschild Law Firm in Raleigh. My partner, Tom Carroll, and I represent American Finance Trust, owner of Riverbend Marketplace through a special purpose LLC. Their property includes a Walmart and a Kohl's. Unlike some affected owners, American Finance is a real estate investment trust, or REIT, which means it is a publicly owned entity that must meet the strict requirements of the Internal Revenue Code and the ever-complicated requirements of the Securities Exchange Commission. In full compliance of these complex regulatory structures, American Finance placed these properties into a pure play commercial portfolio and then presented these properties through a prospectus approved by the FCC for investment. In reliance upon these representations, a group of individuals have invested tens of millions of dollars. It is no small part of American Finance's fiduciary duties that it must maintain, renovate, and upgrade the commercial value of these properties as necessary, rather than to lower their investment grade values. Rezoning this property would put American Finance squarely at odds with its legal duties to the U.S. government and as a publicly traded REIT and its fiduciary responsibility to its investors. In my preliminary comments, I intentionally did not concentrate on possible legal defects in Asheville's efforts to mandate housing in existing commercial centers, but I fear there are several defects. Isn't the mandate that housing be created when a commercial property owner would expand an exaction? Are not exactions required to have a rational nexus? In layman's terms, a reasonable relationship to the increased public burden generated by new or expanded use. We don't see a reasonable relationship here. And where in the state enabling legislation is this type of exaction authorized? So far, we have not been able to find it. In summary, encouraging the creation, development of lifestyle centers is a positive step, but they are not feasible everywhere, and the legitimate approach for government regulators is to offer incentives, not mandates, to property owners. Please do not proceed with this text change and/or the subsequent rezoning of our property pursuant to the text change and the accompanying regulatory exactions proposed. Thank you very much for your time.
Council, our next caller is Martin Freedy. Your line is open.
Thank you. I think I would just reiterate, well, first of all, I don't have a dog in the fight with the property that's being rezoned. I think my concern is, I guess, the next phase of this, in addition just to the ordinance itself. I think the smaller properties that this may affect in the future is going to be extremely burdensome to those properties. And the ability to develop those properties, if you have a smaller parcel, also think that the ordinance should take into consideration that many of these properties are redevelopment properties that have existing easements, covenants, restrictions that are in place that prohibit certain uses, that require certain parking ratios, that dictate location of buildings and all types of other things that are, these are title documents and can't be changed unless you get multiple, the property owner and any other vested tenant or to approve those, which can be problematic when you have a large number of people that may be involved in it. So I think that John Spake had a really good comment regarding, use it as a tool in the toolbox and maybe work through the ordinance and figure out what the kinks are, but not have it be such a requirement because it's going to drastically negatively impact commercial redevelopment and some new development. Thank you.
Council, our final caller for this item is John Spake. John, your line is now open.
Hi, this is John Spake again. Thank you for letting me speak again. Tonight we weren't able to make presentations like we normally would if we were in person in front of you. And that restriction that was applied I know it's COVID related, but it greatly impacts our ability to present our position by you not being able to see visuals of what we're explaining. I did sign an affidavit earlier today and was submitted to you, so hopefully you've had time to see that addresses some of our concerns since we weren't able to do it in person. One thing that I saw for the first time in 35 months of doing this was one of your exhibits that you put up on the screen by planning staff today, and it showed the Merriman Avenue corridor and the Tunnel Road North corridor, which is from the tunnel down to, say, Kenilworth Road. And it was apparent that only three properties owned by one property owner is mandated by residential. And those are the parcels owned by Ingalls Market. This is the Ingalls on Merriman, the Ingalls on Tunnel, and Innsbrook Mall. So, you're basically doing one action there, and that does not seem to be equitable. Also tonight, your staff said, and I quote, that the city is getting a lot of requests for new development. And when I was at the original planning and zoning hearing for this in July, there were 3 multifamily complexes in front of us before the urban centers agenda item. And I knew two of the people doing them, their staff. And, if you really want residential development in Asheville, or you want any kind of development, make it easier. Give incentives. Don't make the process hard. There are plenty of people who want to build apartments in this town, and it's impossible to get things done. And instead of forcing property owners to have this, unproven new code, why don't you just, like I said, put it in the toolbox as you just approved it, but don't force it on anybody. Let someone choose to use it. Thank you for your time. Good night.
All right, that's the last comment. I'll close the public hearing. Now, can I get a motion to rezone approximately 122 acres of property to Urban Place Form District and associated changes? Yes.
Before you do that, may I please say something? Before you.
But you know that you can comment after we make the motion. You can still comment after the motion in a second, okay? All right, do I have a motion?
This is Sage. I'll move.
Is there a second?
This is Glenn. I'll second.
Okay. Do you have a comment?
Yes. The one thing I'd like to say is this.
Excuse me. Can you speak a little louder? I'm having a difficult time.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sorry. Okay. Let me turn up. Okay. The one thing that I'd like to say is I'm not opposed to the urban village. I like the concept. I just think that there needs to be more work on it to make it work for what we're trying to accomplish. Because if you look at what we're really trying to, it's a very ambitious thing to take on. It really is. Because like I said, there's not a whole lot of proven track records where it's really been a success. I will say that. I've lived in areas where they have them, and I've seen some of them that actually turned into ghost towns because people actually frequent certain nodes, that were set up that way. So like I said, it's something that we really need to think about and maybe even try, certain areas to see how effective it is before we mandate it on, all these private investors. And the reason I say this is because the thing is, when we first started with the urban village or whatever and all these things, we're trying to get housing for people. We wanted affordable housing. And when I look at the mandate and what you're trying to achieve, guess what? There's not many affordable units actually will come out of this. And not only that is when, because right now, because of all the legal issues that I see with this, that we're gonna be fighting for a while. I truly believe that. So do we want to spend a lot of time fighting something and then hoping that we get enough affordable housing? Or maybe we need to start looking at a way to compromise where we can concentrate on what's really important right now is affordable housing. We need affordable housing now. The next year, we don't need affordable housing 5-6 years from now, because with the issue that's before us, what you're going to do is, like I said, private investors are just going to sit on the properties. They're not going to do anything. Just because we mandate it, and they don't have to do anything. So what have we accomplished? That's not affordable housing. I think what we really need to do is concentrate on affordable housing and concentrate on maybe looking for areas that are close to grocery stores or close to amenities that we actually can use now for affordable housing. And we don't have to worry about 10 or 20% that they can give to us. Maybe we need to concentrate on developing places with affordable housing or affordable home ownership that we can start actually making an impact, for what the community needs. Because fighting something that does not really show anything, like I said, no return for a while coming back, if it does come back, and using money to fight something that we, that we will have to fight without a doubt because of the property rights situation. I just can't vote for something like this until we actually try to work out some kind of compromise with these private investors, because we need them and they need us. And mandates are not going to do it. Thank you.
May I go?
Yes, I should like it.
Thank you, Sandra. I hear you on Councilwoman. Sorry. I hear you on the affordability now. I agree. And while we may or may not see legal challenges that come from this, it is worth mentioning again that the owner of these properties, or developer, whomever they hire to do them, can simply request a conditional zoning and not go up against this if they find that it is too difficult to meet. This reminds me of a question we had in AHAC, Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, over the years, which is who's responsible for creating, building, and maintaining affordable housing? Is it governments? Is it the private world of development, the private real estate owners, private property owners? Who's responsible? And no one ever really knows the answer. And I think really it's all of us. It's all hands on deck. And if a large entity in the community has a problem building housing on their site, we have a larger problem, because then that means that the community does not understand the dire need for housing in this community, whether it be housing inventory, housing at expensive levels, housing at deeply affordable levels. We need housing. And so we may have a larger problem of educating our own community on how desperately we need this. And it's not lost on me, the conversations and the public comments that were said tonight. I appreciate folks calling in. I did not appreciate getting all of those letters right before the meeting started. A little more time would have been helpful to review. But I do understand their points and their concerns. And, perhaps we as a government body need to look more closely at ways to incentivize this. There was a direct correlation between the affordable language in the urban place zoning with the LUIGI, the land use incentive grants. Those two things could tie. So if we were going to say, hey, we need you to produce affordable housing, we said over here, we'll help you incentivize it and afford to build it. So, maybe there's more things we can do like that. And again, like I said earlier, we can always revisit this topic and adjust. So I'm not swayed, but I hear the public comments, and I'm open to having further discussions with those who called in if they would like to discuss incentives or ways that they envision their clients and their property owners getting to this vision that this community has so loudly spoken out for. Thank you.
Any more comments? All right, we have a motion and a second. I'll do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Kilgore,
Nay.
Councilwoman Mosley,
No.
Councilwoman Roney,
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner,
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler,
Aye.
and myself, aye. Now I'll turn it back over to the mayor. Esther, calling Esther.
Vice Mayor, I have sent the mayor a text to log back on.
Sorry, I'm here. Phew. Okay.
Vice Mayor, I have sent the mayor a text to log back on.
I'm here. Sorry, I'm here. Phew. Okay.
Vice Mayor, I have sent the mayor a text to log back on.
I'm here. Sorry, I'm here. Hold on.
Vice Mayor, I have sent.
It keeps repeating. What's going on?
Because I had my YouTube video up, so I knew when to come in, but it all happened too quick. All right, anyway, I'm here. Sorry about that. Let me pull up my, just 1 minute. All right, sorry. Okay, on to the next item. Public hearing, item B. This is a public hearing to consider conditionally rezoning property located at 70 Mills Gap Road from Industrial District and RS2 Residential Single Family Low Density District to Residential Expansion / Conditional Zone. And we're going to have Principal Planner Shannon Tuck here to present this item.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. If we could advance to the first slide, please. So as the mayor introduced, this is a conditional rezoning petition for the property located at 70 Mills Gap Road. The subject property is approximately 34.5 acres and is located in South Asheville off of Mills Gap Road and with a little additional frontage on Sweeten Creek Road. The property has the two frontage, but I will just say at this stage that the frontage on Mills Gap Road will serve as the primary access into the development. The property frontage on Sweeten Creek Road is topographically inaccessible. So while it looks like the property will have two access points, it really only has the one on Mills Gap Road. As you can see from the Exhibit A zoning map, the property is currently split zoned. The lower third of the property is currently zoned industrial. The upper 2/3 of the property are currently zoned RS2. Should this request be supported, we would rezone this property from industrial and RS2 to residential expansion conditional zone, and that is for the purpose of constructing a 73-unit residential development. Next slide, please. In reviewing the aerial imagery, there's just a few things I'd like to point out. First, you can see there are some jurisdictional streams on the property. The one that we're most interested in is the one to the south. It's a little bit hard to tell from this map, but a portion of that stream actually comes down that little leg that is the entrance into the property from Mills Gap Road. Because this will be the entrance, unfortunately, there is no way to avoid impacting that stream. That portion of the stream will be piped in order to accommodate the new entry road. However, the rest of the stream will remain daylighted and with the aquatic buffer in place. Also, in the middle of the screen, you can see a little looks like a little bald spot. That is the approximate location of some unconsolidated fill. It's essentially buried garbage. This will have to be excavated and removed and mitigated in order to have any kind of development on that portion of the site. And then I also want to point out the upper 2/3, the part that is zoned currently zoned RS2. That is the steepest part of the property. And if you look carefully, you can actually kind of see the shadowing of the little mountain ridges that kind of run through the property. That upper 2/3 of the property is proposed to remain undeveloped and undisturbed. So the steepest part of the property will remain undisturbed and will allow for sort of a large consolidated bit of undeveloped open space land. Next slide, please. So all of our conditional zonings, we begin by looking at the city's future land use map, which is part of the Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan. The subject property is currently designated residential neighborhood in that plan, which describes predominantly single-family development, lower density single-family development. It is our least intensive designation. This property, the proposal is for 73 acres across 73 units across over 34 acres. So it does qualify as a low density development. The designation also describes that when you have environmentally sensitive properties, you should look at clustering. And this proposal does propose to cluster the development on that lower, less steep portion of the property that is currently zoned industrial. So as a result, a change in the future land use map is not required. Next slide, please. So before I discuss the site plan, I just want to give you a little orientation. We typically look at our maps with north being at the top of the page. The site plans have all been tipped 90 degrees clockwise. So north is now on the right-hand side of the page. And you can see that southern entrance on Mills Gap Road on the left side of the page. Now, the site plan that is on your screen currently is not the plan that is being proposed this evening. This is the plan that was originally reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission back in May, and it's a little bit different, and it's gone through a bit of an evolution. And I think it's important to kind of briefly look at the changes in the plan over time to kind of understand, the different positions on the plan that have also evolved. So a couple things that have not really changed as the plan has evolved is the road layout. So these are private roads and sidewalks. It's a private development. It also has private infrastructure. So stormwater and water will be private, and some private community features such as the retaining walls, the open space areas. There is one small community sort of community gathering or playground area, or I guess we don't really know exactly how it'll be programmed, but it's there located inside the loop, that main loop road to the left. So that is a little small community space. And then of course you have the upper portion of the property, that 22 plus acres that will be undisturbed, and that has remained consistent throughout. And, all of the plans locate the development in approximately the same location. And so the removal of that unconsolidated fill will also be required with all of the different plans. So this first plan was essentially a single family subdivision. It shows 76 single family lots. They're small lots, less than 4,000 square feet per lot, but 76 of them kind of stacked uniformly along this new road system. Next slide, please. The last plan was the plan that was reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission back in May. Now, back then, we were still doing the two-step process where we reviewed the plan at one meeting and held the public hearing and then voted it on the second meeting. So after reviewing the plan in May, the applicant heard some feedback from the commissioners, some concern about the environmental impact, the lack of diversity in the kind of housing types, and a few other things. And they revised that plan after that May meeting to be reviewed by the commission in the June meeting to see if it better addressed their concerns. There were some very positive changes. Some of the cut slopes that you can see on the northern end of the property, so that's to the right of your page, those were made less steep. So they originally were proposing a 1.5 to 1 slope. They revised that to 2 to 1. Which is what the steep slope development requirements currently require. They also widened the planting strip between the road and the sidewalks, giving more room for street trees. And they, I think most notably, added or replaced or substituted a number of their single-family detached lots with townhomes. So the Planning and Zoning Commission had said, could you look at some other housing types? Something like a townhome or a smaller unit that might have less of a footprint. So they did. They substituted a number of their single-family lots for townhomes. However, the environmental impact or the basically the environmental footprint of this plan was very similar to the first plan. So it essentially just kind of put a different kind of housing unit in the same place that those single-family detached units were located. And the commission said, we appreciate the changes that you've made. We think you're moving in the right direction. However, it's not enough for our support, and they recommended against the project back in June. Next slide, please. So the applicant went back to the drawing board. They came back with another revised plan. And you can see, if you look on the lower right-hand side of the page, that a lot of the impact area kind of fell there. So as the development gets closer to the steeper portion of the property, as you try to put units on that steep slope, you end up creating this sort of grading impact. And the steeper the property and the deeper you go, the further that grading impact extends. And so by removing those units on that northeast corner, which would be the lower right-hand side of this page, you have significantly reduced the grading extent. So the applicant had originally proposed, I think, grading approximately 13.5 acres. They were able to reduce their impact by 2 acres by adjusting their plans a little bit. So they originally actually proposed a net increase in total units from the 76 single-family homes to the they added 3 units for that interim plan. And in order to try to reduce the footprint, they actually are now proposing a net reduction in units. So they went from 76 to 73 units. So 51 single-family lots, 22 townhome lots, but more importantly, they were able to kind of change that corner. If you could go back to the last plan, just to kind of better illustrate what I'm talking about. Ashley, if you could go back one. So if you look in that lower right-hand corner, you see those 6 townhome units, and you can see that very steep cut slope behind that tall retaining wall. So that retaining wall is close to 25 feet, and then you've got a 40-foot cut bank. So if you're looking out your back window, you're looking at a very tall retaining wall with a very tall cut bank. So it's kind of an uncomfortable situation. Plus, there is this pretty big environmental impact. So next slide, please. So in this current version, which is the version that is being proposed to council this evening, you can see that all of that grading has gone away now, or almost all of it. So that is what allows this project to reduce the extent of grading. You can also notice that the one retaining wall for those 6 townhomes is now totally gone, but it also has reduced the need for the retaining wall that was just next to it to the south or to the left on this page. That formerly was a much more extensive wall, and that has been significantly reduced. Additionally, the applicant has shifted some of the units and has kind of adjusted slightly and the location of the retaining wall slightly, so that impacts on the daylighted stream that runs through the property is reduced. So previously there had been a little bit of encroachment through the construction of those retaining walls into that stream, and that's been pulled back now so that you don't have the same level impact. So we believe that those aquatic buffers will remain intact. And the net proposal is the 51 single-family lots that you see here and 22 townhomes. So this is all a single-family product. It's just a detached unit versus an attached unit. So they're single-family detached and single-family attached. Next slide, please. So the plan, as I stated, has been revised twice now based on feedback from the Plan Zoning Commission and staff. It replaced the 25 single-family home lots with 22 townhomes, so that was a net reduction. I didn't point out when we were looking at the site plans, but we also added shared driveways for all of the townhomes. So now instead of having a driveway for each single-family lot, we now have shared driveways, which makes the walking environment a little bit more comfortable for the pedestrians. The depth of the driveways has been increased slightly to ensure that there's at least 18 feet minimum clearance. So that is to ensure, and this was a recommendation that came from the Plan Zoning Commission, that's to basically ensure that a car parked in the driveway won't overhang the sidewalk. So again, it's to try to keep that sidewalk free and clear. As I mentioned earlier, the planting strip was widened, no longer requiring a modification. The original proposal required several additional modifications over what's being requested today. That was one of them. The steepness of the cut slopes was reduced from 1.5 to 1 to 2 to 1, also no longer requiring a modification. The extent of grading was reduced from 13.5 acres to 11.5 acres. And the extent of the retaining walls was reduced and pulled away from the aquatic buffer. You can see there's also a couple images of the townhome product that is proposed as part of this development. Next slide, please. The applicant had also provided a number of different models. With such a small lot, there was some concern of how practical it was to build lots and maintain all of the required setbacks and particularly with property that has some topography to contend with. The applicant provide 6 different models that he believed would fit on these particular lots. Those models range in size from a little over 1,300 square feet to just under 2,400 square feet. So there would be a variety of home floor plans that a potential home buyer could select from as these were constructed. This slide shows 2 of the models that could be proposed. The materials that were submitted to council and are posted show all 6 that had been supplied by the applicant. Next slide, please. So the Planning and Zoning Commission, as I mentioned earlier, they reviewed the project initially in May of 2021 and then voted on June. And they did recommend denial of the project as formally proposed. So this again has been revised subsequent to the commission's review and based on some of the feedback that the applicant heard at that meeting. The commission has not had the opportunity to review or evaluate the revised plans. So I think if there had been that opportunity, there could have been a different outcome potentially. Next slide, please. This is a conditional zoning, and all conditional zonings come with a list of project conditions. There are 2 technical modifications that are requested as part of this application. The first is to allow a 6-foot back of curb sidewalk at the entrance, which is a little bit different than our typical 5-foot strip with a 5-foot sidewalk. And that is because you may recall from the maps and the site plan, it's a very narrow bit of frontage along Mills Gap Road. And so it's a narrow strip. It really doesn't accommodate all of the road width that we need and a 5-foot planting strip with a 5-foot sidewalk. So the applicant is proposing a 6-foot sidewalk back of curb on just that one stretch. And then once you get into the development or the property as it widens, it transitions to the 5 and 5. Grading also does exceed what is normally allowed in our steep slope standards. So normally the project would be limited to no more than 31% of the site being graded or approximately 10.5 acres. The applicant is asking to grade about 11.5 acres, which is a little over 33% of the site. And that is to produce 73 residential dwelling units, 51 single-family detached homes, and 22 attached townhomes. The conditions also include a description of the private infrastructure that is private road, sidewalk, utility, and community infrastructure. There is also private open space, including that centrally located community space, plus those 23 acres of undisturbed steep slope land. This project also proposes 5 affordable units. That was proposed from the beginning, and it remains as part of this application. These are home ownership units, so it's a little bit of a different model, and they will be affordable to those earning 80% AMI for a minimum period of 15 years. And that concludes my introduction. Next slide, please. Oh, I think that might be all the slides. Normally I put a staff recommendation here. Staff does recommend approval of this project based on the plan that has been revised and submitted to council. We had expressed some concern and reservations with that earlier plan. Similar to the Planning and Zoning Commission, applauded the revisions at that interim step that went to the commission back in June, but it wasn't quite enough. However, with the recent revisions We do feel that the environmental impact and the footprint of that project has shrunk now. It's pulled away from the aquatic buffers and some of the other sensitive features of the site. So we do feel that this is a good project for this location, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
It looks like we've got some questions, and I don't know who went first, but I've got Sage and Gwen and Sandra.
Shannon, thank you so much for the presentation. You actually addressed most of my questions by detailing us through the changes since P&Z. I thought that was really helpful. I had reached out to P&Z to inquire, and the step-by-step really helped. I'm glad to see those improvements. Throughout the presentation, you were referring to affordable units at 80% AMI. I've got the conditions pulled up, and I'm seeing 80 to 100 AMI. So I would like some clarity on if these are proposed 5 units capped at 80% AMI, or if it is a range.
That is a really good question. My recollection was that we were targeting the 80% or below AMI. But of course, conditions come from the applicant and have to be agreed to by the applicant. So I would maybe defer to Mr. Stevens and let him answer that question.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. Councilwoman Turner, good question. No, what we offered to do was 80%, not 80 to 100%. That, in all the iterations of this project, that just got slipped through. So for the record, my client is prepared to offer 5 of these completed homes to individuals or families, income qualifying at 80% of AMI. And they would be deed restricted so that the city of Asheville would hold the restriction. If the buyer wanted to sell in a year, the city would have the right to repurchase that unit with a 2% annual growth each year, up to, as Shannon explained, for 15 years. So that way, folks can build equity, but will be disincentivized to just flip it to the highest bidder. That way, the city can ensure that those homes are available for at least that period of time. And by the way, because my client will be selling these units, he would have no objection to that restriction extending on forever. So that if that would be better, that would be fine with us. It's just something the city would have to keep track of because they would hold the deed restriction. But no, we're not asking for 80 to 100%. We're asking for 80. And I would note that my client, John Simpson, will very likely lose money on each of those 5 sales. So it is a significant voluntary offer by a developer that really very much wants to develop this property. And he understands that as a developer, he has a role to play in trying to address the affordable housing crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. I appreciate that clarity, and I'm thankful to hear it's at 80. You made some great points, and this is actually a part in the market, affordable housing market, that is so challenging to get. Affordable home ownership is nearly impossible in this community right now. I'm just curious, since these are conditions that are put forth by the applicant, if you were applicant considered or would consider, I don't know where the 5 came from, it's a random percentage. I just was wondering if your client would consider the 10% figure of units, just to keep it consistent with other.
Yeah, at 5, it's 7% of the total units. We really spent some time talking about that. This site, as I'll explain in a minute when I go through my presentation, it's pretty challenging. It's got a huge amount of unconsolidated fill that will have to be removed and remediated, and then fill dirt brought in, and the whole site leveled. The acquisition cost is not. It's significant. So, when developers try to run the pro formas on a project like this, they have to look at where they're going to make their money. And since he will very likely lose money on those 5, he felt like he could commit to that, but he just wasn't ready at this point to commit to more. And, I know we need more, but that's all he can do. And it's not insignificant.
Why are the why are the utilities all going to be private? is it that far away from sewerage and water? I mean, the one thing that is of concern to me is down the road, especially when projects, have privately developed utilities, sometimes the home owners association doesn't keep it up, and then the property owners are stuck with a pretty big surprise down the road. So I was just wondering why they aren't developing it and then trying to turn it over to the city and to the MSD.
Right. Great question. So the MSD will be turned over. I mean, the MSD, it will be MSD sewer, as I understand it. And Daniel Hyatt, our engineer, is available. He can jump in here if I say anything that's incorrect. But it will be MSD sewer. It will be City of Asheville water, but it will be pumped up from, I think Mills Gap Road is probably where that line is, into a tank, and it will then be distributed as a, quote, private water system to the neighborhood. So we're not talking about a development where they're having to dig a well and treat the water. This is going to be good City of Asheville water. I'm no expert on the carry cost of a system like that, but having walked the site myself, it's just not that far from Mills Gap Road. You can see that on the map. So logically, that will not be a major long-term maintenance problem. The roads are proposed to be private roads, but they're pretty straightforward roads. You got a driveway in, and you saw the site plan. And other than that, the only other private infrastructure would be stormwater. And, that's not uncommon for developments. And for that matter, roads are not uncommon either. And I don't know, at some point, maybe they could be turned over to the city, but I know the plan calls for roads, water, and stormwater to be privately owned and maintained. And, having been on the site myself, I feel confident that's going to be a manageable thing for this property owners association of 73 owners.
And just to clarify further for this and any other projects out there, when you have private utility infrastructure in the road, the city is unable to maintain the road. So that's our policy. I don't know very much about water distribution systems, but this system is not standard. It's not something that the city would normally maintain as part of their public system. So that's why it has to be a private system. In addition to the items that have been mentioned, the other site features that will have to be privately maintained are the retaining walls. And that is also something that the city would not customarily ever publicly maintain.
And as for that, I would say if we were talking about a 10-unit subdivision with those expectations, that would be a concern that we would all share. But with 73, surely that's not an insurmountable hurdle for a homeowners association to manage.
Hi, Wyatt.
Hi.
I just wanted to see, I don't know if you can actually share this with us, but what is the price point or range of these units? You have the townhomes and you have the sort of single family.
I appreciate that question because I asked John Simpson that question earlier. And of course, it's what the market will bear, but he's thinking mid 300s for the individual single family homes, most likely based on the market. So it's a product that's just not readily available. I had a friend recently going through a divorce and had to find a home, and she was astounded at the lack of single family product in South Asheville. She ended up having to buy a single wide trailer. That was all that she could afford. That was available in the school district where her children go to school. So this is a real problem, and this development goes a long way toward helping fill that need. We know that one of the keys to addressing the affordable housing crisis is more housing. That's clear, and this will do that.
Okay, now wondering also, when you talk about the 5 units that they're making available, will those be from townhome or from the actual single family home?
That's a good question, and I don't actually know the answer to that. I'll have to ask my client. I know that the original plan was all single family homes, And so the commitment was 5 of those single-family homes. And then in response to the comments that we got from staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission, of course, we, reduced the footprint and then had to meet those homes with the townhomes. But if this council is inclined to say, we would like to see those 5 affordable units as separate single-family homes, I know my client would be happy to agree to that condition.
Okay. Well, that's not really important. That's not really one of my issues because, like I said, with the townhomes, if they are the townhomes, then to be able to own them, that means that someone with lesser, a wealth could afford those townhomes, and that sort of fits into a bracket that we really need to. So it really wasn't.
Yeah, I don't, it's just not something I've discussed with Mr. Simpson. It's a great question, and I would suggest if it's not a matter of concern to this council, that we leave that open, and that will be determined as the project goes along. This is still fairly early on. They will have to provide 5 affordable units, but whether they're townhomes or single family,
Okay, no worries. Thank you.
This is Sage. I'll voice that I like them being the single family units.
Fair enough.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, we're going to open the public hearing on this item. And, I'm sorry, we're going to close the public hearing because we did not have anyone sign up to speak on this item. So do I have?
Actually, if I may, I've got a short presentation I haven't delivered yet, and I promise I'll move through it quickly. Ashley, could you load my PowerPoint, please? Next slide. So this is an aerial overview of the property, and you would know it if you drive down Sweeten Creek Road or Mills, really Sweeten Creek, going north, and you look up and you see this beautiful tree-covered ridge. That ridge will be totally protected. The road, the access road, will come off of Mills Gap right next to the Hawthorne Apartments that you can see under construction here. Now they're finished. Next slide. So you know all the numbers. We're going to disturb about 11.25 to 11.5 acres, but the remaining 23, almost 23 and a half acres will remain wooded and undisturbed. And that's significant. John is sensitive to the environmental concerns, to the visual impact this will have. It will sit kind of right behind the Hawthorne Apartments, a little bit above, and you'll be able to see it, but what you will really look up as you see is this beautiful, wooded hillside. Next slide. So these were taken by me as I was walking up where the driveway will be. On the left, you're looking down at the Hawthorne Apartments. On the right, you're up kind of where the homes, more where they will be on the pad where they will be, and you can sort of see what it looks like. Next slide. So I mentioned, and Shannon mentioned, the unconsolidated fill. Literally, there is this large volume of, it's like household garbage and cinder blocks and things that just some prior owner of the property just dumped it there and put dirt on top of it. And you can actually see in the photograph on the left, that's what it looks like now. I mean, it's been there so long, the trees have grown up out of it, but clearly that's not good for the environment. There is a creek that runs into it and it just disappears into this garbage. And then it just kind of seeps out the other side. We will replace that with a proper culvert, pull all of that stuff out at great expense, clean up the site, and then level it out in order to put the house pad. Next slide. So, that is a rendering of what it shows. It's a little bit easier, at least for me, to visualize what it will look like. You can imagine the street trees, the sidewalks. So folks that live here, it would be an easy walk down the drive on the sidewalks, down the edge of that drive to Mills Gap Road, and you can get to Whole Foods or Ingles or the Ace hardware store in just a couple of minutes, on foot or on bike. So it's a very walkable neighborhood that's just tucked in there, really underutilized piece of property. And I think this is a kind of a clever solution for it. One alternative would be to do single family, high-end luxury homes up on that ridge. They'd have views all the way to Mount Pisgah, but that's not what this proposes. This proposes to create houses for everyday people to live in. Next slide. It substantially meets all the technical requirements of the UDO. It preserves a visible mountain ridge with mature tree canopy in the heart of South Asheville. Next slide. It meets a number of the Living Asheville priority strategies. It makes streets more walkable, comfortable, and connected. You've got the sidewalks, the planting strips, pedestrian access. Next slide. Celebrate the unique identity of neighborhoods through creative placemaking. We will be creating a neighborhood of 73 small, admittedly small lots, but individual homes and townhomes with 5 reserved for people making 80% of AMI. Next slide. Right on the transit line for not far from Sweeten Creek and, of course, Mills Gap Road, close to many different kinds of jobs. Folks will probably have cars here and they will have space to park them, but really you could walk down the driveway. It's a little steep, but you could do it and you could catch a bus and get anywhere. Next slide. This will increase and diversify the housing supply. It'll promote the development and availability of affordable and workforce housing. I would argue that at that price range, I know it seems high, but it's almost in that workforce range for the market rate units. Next slide. So, we would ask that you approve this plan. We've worked hard with city staff. Shannon's been very helpful guiding us through this process, expressing her concerns. We listened carefully to planning and zoning, and we came back with something that minimizes the impact, protects the streams, recovers a piece of property that is, full of junk right now, and creates much needed housing. To me, this is a developer, unlike the ones we talked about in the last presentation, this is a developer that wants to build residential housing. I would urge you to approve it as presented. Thank you. Councilwoman Roney had a question.
Thank you, Wyatt. So appreciating the work to mitigate the impact on the creek and also steep slope. I am curious, it says protected about 23 acres of maturing trees. Can you, for the benefit of the public, speak to what prevents this from being phased development and does indeed protect the tree canopy?
Thank you for that question. I should have explained it. So because this is conditional zoning, if you all approve this plan, that is the only thing that can be built. The only way anything else could be built, we'd have to come back to a future city council and ask for more. And they would look at this ordinance, they could look at the minutes, and they would say no.
Mute. And then the second question that I have is, will the homeowners association restrict short-term vacation rentals? That will be for them to decide, that group to decide. We did not ask as part of the conditional zoning to permit short-term rentals. And so since it's in the city of Asheville, Shannon, you jump in here. I don't think that they can under the city zoning code.
Under our current rules, we don't allow short-term vacation rentals in any of our residential districts. And so it wouldn't be allowed with this project. We would, however, allow homestays. And sometimes those get confused with short-term vacation rentals.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, now I'm going to open the public hearing and close the public hearing because we have no one signed up to speak. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
This is Kim, I'll second.
Okay, thank you. I have a motion and a second. I'm going to do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
No.
Myself, aye. Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Councilwoman Kilgore. Kilgore.
She voted for, oh,
Sandra, did you vote?
Aye.
Oh, thank you, okay. All right, we have, yes, Councilwoman Roney.
For those that are watching this meeting and just for the benefit of the public moving forward, when we talk about places that are on a transit corridor, we have a long way to go with transit. But one of the things that we are working on is increasing our transit service frequency and hours to South Asheville. And so this would include the S3 and S6 routes for which this project that we just passed serves.
Thanks for tying that together. Happened.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
All right, moving on with our agenda. So our next item, public hearing item C, needs to be continued, and our last item has been withdrawn. So to wrap up our public hearings agenda, can I get a motion and a second to continue the public hearing to consider an amendment to Articles 2 and 16 of the Unified Development Ordinance to update definitions and regulations related to homestays until December 14th, 2021.
I'll move. Oh, this is Sage. I'll second.
Okay, so Maggie, I believe, made the motion. Okay, and Sage seconded. All right, I'm going to do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Roney?
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner?
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler?
aye.
Myself, aye. Vice Mayor Smith?
Aye.
Councilwoman Kilgore?
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. We do not have any unfinished business items, nor do we have any new business items. So I'm going to move on to the informal discussion and public comment. And we do have several folks signed up to speak. I'm going to read a small portion of script for this.
Mayor?
Yes.
May I ask the question? And I'm sorry, but this is an item backwards, but I wanted to make sure before we leave this meeting that the condition that we imposed on that last project did go through as 80 AMI. We did not need to amend that motion, did we? Their correction in the middle of the hearing stating it will suffice? Okay, I just need to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Okay. Okay. We will now connect live calls from our speaker queue for informal discussion and public comment. Again, we're only taking callers who signed up in advance. Callers, you will first hear staff inform council that you're next to speak. Then you will hear an automated message letting you know you are unmuted and live in the meeting. You may begin speaking after the automated message. If you accidentally drop out of the speaker queue, just redial the number and meeting code, press *3 to rejoin the speaker queue. You'll have 3 minutes to comment, and at the end of the 3 minutes, you will hear a bell and staff will ask you to wrap up your comment. All right, I'm going to turn it over to staff to manage the public comment.
Council, our first caller is Jonathan Wainscott. Jonathan, your line is open.
Hey, good evening, everybody at council. I miss seeing you guys in person. I was reading the internet the other day and I came across this article written by David Forbes and Matilda Bliss for the Asheville Blade concerning a PR firm called CoalPro used by the police department. It was a little bit concerning, but at the end of the article, David and Matilda went on to attack Councilwoman Mosley, saying the following. During council's June 22nd budget vote, council member Antoinette Mosley, who was controversially appointed by city council instead of the seat going up for election, used the sort of talking points honed by CoalPro to claim that a reduced police force actually hurts Black people, especially Black women. At the August 24th meeting, she falsely claimed that some white speakers calling for defunding showed that it was exclusively a white-driven effort. She claimed she had talked to some Hillcrest residents who wanted more police. Mosley was using an old tactic that white liberals, often ignorant of politics within the Black communities, often fall for. Black communities are not a monolith. Officials and groups within them that support the status quo tend to get disproportionate attention from white-dominated media, while movements for actual change get minimized even when they have wide support. Mosley, a well-off lawyer with conservative politics, is essentially pushing the same position as the police chief. And I just want to say, first of all, there should be no controversy concerning the appointment of Ms. Mosley. It was on point. We fill the vacancies on council with the same level of specificity that we elect our council members. It's codified in our charter, and perhaps Brad Branham can clarify that once and for all. And Ms. Mosley certainly never said that the defunding movement was exclusively white. I think it's crazy that David and Matilda somehow are the educated white liberals while everybody else is ignorant. I do claim to be ignorant of what the politics within the Black community is. I don't know what that is, but I don't think that I'm going to go to David and Matilda to find out what time it is in the Black community. So I just wanted to offer a little bit of chivalry, if I may, to a conservative woman, Miss Mosley, and coming to your defense. I hope that that's okay. I hope the rest of you have a good night. And as always, the invitation to have snacks is open. So have a good night, everybody. Thank you very much.
Council, our final caller is Pastor Hardaway. Pastor, your line is now open.
I'm live.
Yes, you're live.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, greetings. I'm Pastor Hardaway, Pastor Rock Hill Mission Baptist Church, a resident of Shiloh, South Asheville community for the last 20 years. To Mayor Meinheimer, Vice Mayor Smith, council members Kilgore, Mosley, Roney, Turner, Weiser, and the city manager, Campbell. And first, I'd like to say I appreciate this opportunity just to talk a little bit about reparations. I do understand the challenge the city council confronts during these conflicting and contradicting historical times. In fact, the composition of the council is historic, and I do appreciate that. My prayer is that this council will continue to work together to exchange ideas and to decisively seek to listen and to learn from the community on how to make progressive and positive changes for the good of all people that live and visit Asheville. Last year, 2020, during the days of protest, City Council enacted bold and unprecedented resolutions. Council moved swiftly and immediately to acknowledge injustices perpetrated on and against African Americans that denied them their very basic God-given human and constitutional rights. The council issued an apology and decided to give reparations to African American citizens here in Asheville. From my perspective, no reparations or payment can compensate for the horrendous treatment of my ancestors in the past or the treatment still in place today. However, reparation is a symbol that says we're not going to conduct business and operate today the same way we operated yesterday. The council took bold and unprecedented actions last year, but today it's different. The timeline for reparations seems to have stalled on bureaucracy or by people of influence who were resistant to positive changes. In the 60s, Reverend Dr. King authored a book called Why We Can't Wait. Changes sometimes require swift and immediate action. Black Americans could not continue to wait for voters' right bill that gave them the right to vote like every other American citizen. Black Americans could not continue to wait to have equal opportunity to participate in the rights and privileges afforded to every American. The timeline for the full enactment of the reparations is at best 2023. But by then, the enactment of reparations could be extended even further into the future. We cannot wait for reparations. Political temperament changes. People's memories are short. In the past, America's administrations have been long on promise of justice and short on implementing. Redlining was swift and immediate. Urban renewal took property and displaced thousands of Black Americans was swift and immediate. If change is to come quickly, it must happen during this administration. If not you, then who? And if not now, then when? This is a historical Asheville City Council. Continue, and I encourage you to continue to make historical, unprecedented decisions and resolutions that have a positive impact on the lives of people, neighborhoods, communities, and the city. Thank you. I appreciate it. God's blessings.
Thank you, Pastor Hardaway. I think that's a nice conclusion to our evening. Council, unless there are any other comments, we are adjourned.